Hi everybody and welcome back. We are not finished yet. So we have the next presentation coming up. I'm pleased to welcome Shumin Chen today, broadcasting from Singapore. So it's evening actually. Shumin has worked as a consultant with customers in various industries globally. She's really widely regarded as a leading expert in ASD-STE100 in the Simplified Technical English space and in training, aviation documentation, and multilingual documentation. She is now leading the ASD-STE100 training arm of a company called Shufrans TechDocs. Shumin, take it away. Stage is yours.
Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Shumin and I am the Principal Simplified English Trainer at Shufrans TechDocs based here in Singapore. For today's 20-minute session, I would like to share my experiences in the field of Simplified Technical English with you, especially seeing how this international standard helps to make the creation and management of global documentation a little bit less of a headache. And we are talking about the standard based on practical experiences over the past 10 years in many different industries. And well, I believe that most of us will recognize this kind of juggling. We have business requirements to take into account. On top of our daily regular workload, just getting the work done is not quite enough. There are various considerations such as time to market or, as the case may be, downtime. Of course, we are all forced to cut corners and save costs wherever possible, and at the same time, we want to be less dependent on a specific supplier. So this means a continuous juggling game where we are going to try and keep everything in balance to get our projects finalized on time, within budget, with the right quality, and without any further compromises. We want to be able to do this work or get the work done our way, and of course, to engineers, it makes a lot of sense to use standards whenever possible in order to achieve similar results. However, surprisingly, in the documentation field, it still happens that standards are not highly regarded. Decision makers do not always have the same kind of regard for documentation that we know is very well deserved and very necessary. Actually, in this respect, the European Union specifically states in its regulations that documentation is an integral part of your product. However, documentation always kicks in when the product is already late, when we are already over budget for the product lifecycle, and we just need to cut corners or are expected to cut corners. Nevertheless, we still want to stand behind what we do and make sure we provide a quality product. So how does Simplified English potentially help us to achieve this? And why, for starters, do we need Simplified English? Because actually, there are 3 times as many native speakers of Mandarin Chinese than there are native speakers of English. However, Chinese doesn't get us very far outside East Asia, so English is a much better choice because it is actually the language that has the highest penetration into other continents. And English happens to be a very rich language, meaning that amongst other things, it has a huge vocabulary. It has about 3 times as many words as German or French. However, in German or French, you can say just the same things that you can say in English. So this implies actually that English has redundant words. So we want to try and do away with this huge unnecessary part of the grammar, of the vocabulary, and would like to further simplify the grammar to what is essential in getting our message across. So moving on to this slide, we are seeing some common problems associated with the use of standard English or whatever people regard as proper language, even when writing documentation. We do find that many readers, many users of documentation get confused at times. The use of confusing, ambiguous, and different words for the same thing all add to confusing the reader, and therefore he's going to need more time to read and hopefully still understand what we are trying to tell him. Of course, it can also prompt him to get annoyed, frustrated, unfortunately, and to call a help desk, or even worse, not to buy any products from the same company anymore. And yes, it can come even worse. He could actually be exposing himself to safety risks. Now, a very important driver for the initiatives that have been around to simplify English, to try and do away with the complex aspects of standard language, have been translation. We need an ever-increasing number of translations, which can be very, very expensive. So translation cost is a very important driver for attempts to standardize. and simplify the English language as the source text. Apart from costs, there is a quality issue. Now, there are many bad translations, but they do not necessarily arise from the fact that the translator was not suited for his job. You can have many perfectly valid English sentences that make a lot of sense, both from a technical and linguistic point of view, yet are impossible to translate into our languages without some genuine doubt. Let's take a very simple example. Replace the gasket, especially when it is written because you don't hear the intonation. So does replace the gasket mean replace it, as in take the old gasket and put it back into place? Or does it mean discard the old gasket, take a new and identical item and fit it in place of the old part? Because this word replace in English has two very distinct yet valid meanings. So translation quality definitely suffers when language is not standardized, whether it is ambiguity or the lack of consistency in our source text. Also, many products require training for engineers or service staff, even for users, operators, and of course technical documentation normally forms the basis for training materials. Again, if the training materials or the technical documentation have complex or complex language, it is going to make it more difficult to get the message across. So training will take more time, be less effective, and therefore affects the usability of our product. Increasingly, we have safety and liability issues that play a role, and there have been quite a few occasions where a documentation has been blamed for accidents or multi-million-dollar lawsuits. Human factors are a big issue when it comes to safety, and documentation is a very important means to try and control, contain, and limit those human errors. So here a very quick technical content checklist for you, and a brief history of simplified English that is definitely not something new, and as recent as the 1970s, it was already introduced as plain English to facilitate communications with the public, and also with obvious roots in the aerospace industry, but nowadays more popular and widely used by non-aerospace and defense customers. So if you ask me in this next slide, what is simplified English? Now, there are many different answers here. I'm not going to give you all of them, and you're always welcome to discuss this at another time. But one answer is it's a set of 65.5 writing rules. Now, this is very similar to what many companies, especially larger companies, may have in place. It is often known as a corporate style guide. Much of the corporate style guide will tell you what words to use, which syntax to try and avoid. So those 65 writing rules, many of the rules will be quite familiar to professional writers and editors. It is not the rules themselves that make simplified English unique, but one aspect that makes simplified English rather unique is the fact that this is a very balanced and rather complete set of rules. It was not based on the personal preferences of just one or two people, but a whole committee that has developed this standard. And they established over the years that these writing rules made sense and allowed them to rewrite any of their existing documentation based on these rules, making their documentation easier to understand while maintaining accuracy and validity. And that makes this set of writing rules rather valuable. One of them is the rule that I would consider the most important one, that basically tells us that you can only use approved words. And this is where simplified English becomes really different from corporate style guides, because the specification includes a core vocabulary of around 930 words. Most of the words are very generally valid for technical documentation purposes, and in simplified English, users are free to use the terminology that is appropriate for any given audience. We can't standardize that because we don't know the audience, and we can't be too specific about the product. Another way to look at simplified English is to say, well, simplified English is simply the most important, universal, and versatile standard to try and get in control of our technical English communications. So simplified English, we already can predict a little bit because of this standardization. It helps us to achieve a number of benefits. We become more consistent on a word level. That starts with the simple fact that we are going to use the same word whenever we refer to the same thing. So that means an improved level of consistency. And the same happens to every sentence, structures, or phrases. Also, if we have this scatter team, like 3 writers permanently employed in the US, a few content writers in Singapore, and another team in Japan. All of them contribute to the same content. Some of them are professional writers, others may be engineers. It doesn't matter. They all fish from the same pond of writing rules and words. They have the same rules, the same words to use and apply. So it is not going to eliminate completely the differences between their writing styles and characteristics, but it is going to go a long way towards standardizing and making sure that we can put those different parts of the documentation together and get a consistent manual and result without the need for rework or editing. And also, we are going to definitely see quality improvements. One of the most essential steps towards quality improvement is the ability to measure and judge quality. And I'm sure my colleagues at Acrolinx could not agree more. Simplified English, if nothing else, definitely provides us with a means to quantify quality. As there are 65 writing rules, we can simply check if the writer complies with these rules. Any violation of the rules means a potential quality loss. Any word that is in there that is not in the dictionary signifies a potential problem. So based on statistics, we can judge how compliant, how good the quality of our documentation is. So a very important, sometimes overlooked, not even recognized benefit of simplified English is that it can provide accurate information to the reader. It is not just the fact that the language is easier to understand for the reader, but actually the technical content becomes more accurate since validation is easier. If you now present a standard English text that is rather sloppy, rather complex at least, to a subject matter expert, and he's tired, chances are, especially when stress levels are high, he will say something along the lines of, "That looks about right." Now, in simplified English, there is no such thing as about right. It's either true or false. It's correct or wrong. So the validation process becomes more straightforward. It is also just about impossible to write anything vague in simplified English. So we are going to present information to the reader that is more to the point, more accurate, more reliable, and that is a very great benefit all in itself. Now, because we have fewer words to choose from and because our syntax is highly regulated, we will use the same sentence patterns over time and time over again, and it means our text becomes more repetitive. And so this basically is one of the elements that contributes to facilitating reuse, improving the efficiency of content management, making it easier to create a piece of information once and reuse it several times based on objective criteria and based on trying to keep product-specific information separate from general or generic information. As I said, there are 65 and a half rules. If you are interested to know about the half rule, I'll refer you to a training session. But basically, these rules, they all have some common characteristics. We have a rule stated, and then we are provided by the ASD committee an approved example and a non-approved example. And generally, even though these approved and non-approved examples may have a very strong aerospace flavor, I must admit that they are very well written, and they provide good examples on how to implement STE in an accurate way. So again, more of the rules. Now, let's have a look at this sample text from an HDTV user manual. It's interesting. There are two pieces of text talking about the same, representing the same information. One of them is in standard English. I won't say which one, and the other one in simplified English. Up to you. I'll give you like a few seconds, 10 seconds to figure it out. Up to you to tell me which one is in simplified. If you can't tell me that directly through the webinar, it's for you to decide which one in your mind, which one is simplified English and which one is in standard English. Now, if you might have guessed by now, the right one is simplified English. Basically, it is shorter, it is more direct, more to the point, user-friendly, and it does away with unnecessary information, only telling the user what needs to be done and when must it be done. So it uses also very simple words to communicate instructions. And for those of you who like graphs more than text, just an overview how the number of unique terms, the translatability, and the overall volume of the text are affected by the use of simplified English as compared to standard English. So in gray, I did a document analysis of one of our customers who works for the mobile X-ray solutions for cancer therapy and treatment. So the gray bar represents terms in standard English, whereas the red one represents the terms you keep in your STE simplified English terminology. So you can see that in this overview, how the number of unique terms and the translatability and overall volume of the text are affected by the use of the terms that we would find in standard English. Only 30% of those words that we will still find in around 30% of the terms that we would find in standard English, only 30% of those we will continue to find in simplified English. So more consistency, less variant, and also the text in simplified English would be easier, predictably easier and faster to translate, and the volume would have been reduced by about 25%, even though some people would claim that it could go up to 80% reduction in text volume in the most optimistic of cases. So once again, STE with its roots in aerospace and defense, it's not necessarily always customers from that industry who choose this standard. Over the years, at least from early 2000s, we are starting to see customers from non-aerospace, non-aviation, non-defense who have come to us for STE consultancy services. As you can see from this short list of customers that we have worked with before. Now, if you would like to implement simplified English, it would be worth considering the following elements. It is, of course, possible to just obtain a copy of the specification, but that would involve a lot of manual work. You need to look up the 65 rules, check every sentence you write against the rules. As part of that, check every word in those sentences against the dictionary in the specification, as well as your list of company-specific terms. Of course, software was designed to do just that for you, not to replace you, only to support you. Creativity is still the writer's responsibility, as is technical accuracy and useful content. And I cannot stress this sentence even more. But you can do away with much of the mechanical work by using a software tool. Both for the writer and for the software, it is important to establish a dictionary that includes those words that you need in order to describe and deal with the words that you need for your products. Now, about STE training, which is something that we have been doing for a few years already. Training, it's not rocket science, but there are some common pitfalls, and you can definitely use some help, some guidance in dealing with those rules, how to correctly, efficiently, and effectively apply them. Syntax, vocabulary, and terminology are all covered by a good training course. If there is software to be used, it should also teach you not so much how to deal with the software menus, but because the checker tools are pretty easy to operate, the problem is more how do you use a checker effectively, not being misled or governed by the software, but making the software an effective assistant in order to rewrite, write, and update your documentation more effectively and accurately. Now, how does one normally build a dictionary? It is not something that you just do on the fly as a writer. You need somebody who has some knowledge about this process, and especially who has the right tools. In the Acrolinx language, this would be the multilingual term extraction tool, or the MTE. Your 5,000-page legacy documents would be filtered by our terminologists to see which ones are valid, which ones are invalid, which terms have the same meaning, and normally you could expect to end up with somewhere between 1,500 to 3,000 industry, company, and or product-specific words. Simplified English stands or falls with the use of approved words only. So this dictionary is of very essential importance in establishing compliance with simplified English and achieving those results that you are looking for. So meaning to say that you could have the best tools, but without a sound or proper dictionary that includes words that you need and excludes non-approved words, simplified English, your simplified English implementation may not work for you in the end, and you could have already overspent your training budget by then, or your money that you spent on software that you paid for, and in the end it did not work for you. So that's a little bit about STE so far. Just a quick overview about the company that I represent, Shufrans TechDocs. We mainly focus on applying international standards in order to improve our documentation processes. Simplified English is our main expertise, but we are also heavily involved in technical writing, multilingual documentation creation, and management. Here we have some questions that I hope I have already managed to answer by now. Whether Simplified English is an aerospace standard, yeah, but still many of the rules and that is in Simplified English actually applies to many other industries worldwide. And also, of course, the tool is definitely not there to replace you. It is only there to act as an assistant. In the end, the creative call and whether your content is accurate all depends on you as the writer. So moving on to our second last slide, I believe. We have actually run 2 user forums for Simplified English where our colleagues could ask or send us questions about anything that they would like to know about Simplified English, to clarify any myths or misunderstanding that people have about Simplified English. Feel free to join us on LinkedIn. Yeah, and this is actually one of the two of the world's largest Simplified English forums on LinkedIn, and you're always most welcome to join us on these groups. So finally, moving on to my last slide, I would like to thank you for your attention and also for your interest in the last 20 minutes or so. Also pointing out that you are always welcome to visit our website or to contact us by email. If you have any questions, any comments at all, feel free to contact us. And that having been said, I would like to go back to Christian and to my colleagues at Acrolinx. Thank them for today's session and for allowing us to share this background of ours with the audience. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Shumin. That was great. We have one question. I'm not sure if you've really answered that before. Let me just read it out. It's a question from one of our colleagues, from Mayu from Japan. She said that there is a current trend in technical documentation is to vary sentences, and it seems to her that ASD-STE100 goes against the current trend. And what are your views on that, Shumin?
Not necessarily, because the standard is that the misunderstanding is that people tend to think that STE sounds like baby language or language from robots. But however, if you apply the rules correctly and you make use of the differences between active and passive voices in your descriptive writing, that should be fine. And if you would like to take a look at some samples, of course, most of the time she would come across instructive sentences, and those sentences, they do have like some kind of a monotonous flavor, but the focus is about getting the work done. But when it comes to descriptive writing, we often encourage our technical writers to keep the sentence length different. Meaning to say that if you have a strong and important message to say, keep your sentence length short to bring across that message. And if you tend to elaborate a little bit on a subject topic, then make sure you develop the sentences and then grow it into a paragraph. So not just, with Simplified English, it doesn't limit your ability to vary your sentence length, your paragraph length, in order to grow that flow. That's the short answer I can give, but I could always take this discussion offline as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really interesting and a great insight in the various use cases and the various, the way how to write technical documentation and how to manage it. Thank you very much. So we have the next session coming up in just about 5 minutes, and again, I'm just wanted to announce that basically the lottery. It's not really a lottery, right? The competition for the best selfies and to win the Apple Watch and the great book package containing 3 great books just happening after the next presentation of Natalie Kelly from HubSpot. So we regroup again at 2:20, so 5 minutes actually now. to get a new coffee, and then see you in the next session. And after the session, we give away the prizes. So see you in a second.